Hello, and thanks for joining us on today on NCI Live. I'm your host, David Groth, and today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity war stories and future trends. Joining me today is Ian McShane, the VP of Strategy for Arctic Wolf. Ian McShane has 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity and operational IT, and he's a former Gartner analyst. He's got a lot of experience in cybersecurity. So, welcome today, Ian. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks so much, man. Good to be here.
Not, not a problem. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Matter of fact, I'm very excited to talk to you today. So, just wanted to remind everyone who's watching us today that we have watching us on YouTube and on LinkedIn that we have the ability you can chat us your questions. Please feel free to do so, and Ian can answer them on air and give us his thoughts and insights on all of these things. And I highly suggest that everyone do so. With that, again, welcome, Ian, and let's talk some cybersecurity war stories and some of your thoughts on these things. I'd like to kind of begin by talking about, who is Arctic Wolf and what you do for them.
Yeah, so thanks. It's great to be here. So we're a security operations company, and we keep thousands of organizations secure by doing basically the one thing that the cybersecurity industry's failed at, and that's making security products actually keep you secure. And the reason I say the industry's failed is, well, just take a look at how much money organizations spend on cybersecurity tools, right? It's billions and billions of dollars every year. And we see new technologies, new buzzwords, new vendors, yet there's still breaches and incidents that happen every single day. And these organizations, right, they're not doing nothing, double negative, right? They're not sat around doing nothing. Many of them are paying a lot of cash for these so-called best of breed vendors. And half of the problem, I think, is that many of the security vendors don't like to play nice together. So you end up with 10, 20, 30 security tools and realistically, nobody to make them work. So that's what we do. We bring that kind of 24/7 security operations to our customers with the tools that they already have, no matter how mature their security program is. I like to call it taking the suck out of the sock, right? By doing all of the mundane and the boring things for them. And as for me, yeah, my name's Ian McShane. I'm the VP of Strategy, which means I get to work with our business and our product leaders to, I guess, help shape the future of the platform and make sure that we're able to keep our customers protected, not only today, but also in the future as well.
Yeah. It's kind of an exciting business to be in right now, wouldn't you say? I mean, cybersecurity it's the hot topic right now.
It's definitely a hot topic. Like, exciting is an interesting way to put it. I think there's a lot of anxiety that goes with this industry as well, because there's so much that's on the line, right? And it's something that's been, I guess, incumbent not only in cybersecurity, but in IT for the past 20, 25, 30 years, as we've seen this growing kind of dependence on IT and 24/7 capabilities, right?
No, absolutely. So, how did you get started in security? What was your beginnings?
Well, look at my face. I'm pretty grey, so you can tell I've been around the block for a while.
You're not the only one.
I kind of started, I guess, in 2001, right, working really as a general dog's body, right, in a small office doing like IT admin, and then managed to upgrade myself to working into a call center, which was a 24-hour call center doing tech support for consumer email, right? And so, you've been around maybe as long as I have, so you'll maybe share my hatred of things like POP3 email and plain text passwords and goodness me, like the devil's application itself, Outlook Express. So I spent a chunk of my time in, really customer-facing roles, and then moved into practitioner in kind of sysadmin, doing work for banks and air freight logistics and ISPs before I moved into the glorious world of software vendors, really. And then after that, I worked for this research company. You mentioned them earlier, a company called Gartner that a lot of people have heard of, where I was one of the lead analysts for endpoint protection. So I used to run documents like the Magic Quadrant for endpoint protection. I spent a lot of time looking at detection and response, things like the applicability of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which was relatively new in 2016, 2017. And I spent, honestly, a lot of my time researching technology trends around the modernization of things like antivirus and next-gen AV that ultimately describes where we are today, right? Which is with this security operations kind of approach.
Yeah. When I first was talking to you and looking at your biography and your history, and when I saw you were working with the Gartner Quadrant, I mean, that's kind of the standard for when we as vendors are looking at different products and other things, being able to look at a Gartner Quadrant and see where different things rate. It's kind of impressive.
Yeah.
So that's, and your experience in someone of a similar background in terms of, history and longevity of product lines and different experiences, and that's why, like I said, that's one of the reasons I'm very excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So
I've been fortunate enough to, cover a lot of disciplines in security, and I think that's really helped the ability to see, where we've come from or where we're going. Because honestly, like a lot of IT we know is very cyclical in nature. So you see like patterns emerging from 10, 5, 15, 20 years ago. Pretty interesting.
yes, I mean it has changed. Uh, How do you see, like, say, so speaking of the history and the length of time and all of that, how have you seen in your experiences, how have you seen the patterns change, like the offense, the defense, and by offense, I'm saying the hack attempts,
Yeah.
the exploit attempts, and then the defense for those attempts. How
Yeah.
have you seen that change?
If you can like extract yourself from the anxiety of the day-to-day kind of work of things, like cybersecurity has a really interesting kind of path, right? If you think on the red side, on the offensive side or the adversary side, like it's it's probably never been easier to get into cybercrime or maybe even crime in general, right? Because of things like the anonymity of the internet, and
Hmm.
the ability to really, learn on demand and get access to a lot of, frankly, really strong and relevant research that can be used for good as much as it can for bad. So it's never really been easier to get into cybercrime. But what's
Yeah.
interesting is, some of the methods some of the adversary groups are taking. We see them like looking and sharing initial access, bidding for different access for different companies, even, rumors of threat actor groups trying to hire people to, accidentally give their credentials up for an organization that they, feel that they could, the adversary could make some money out of. And in an economic downturn, that can be quite enticing for a number of people that might be struggling, right? So although, I say that's like rumors, I've seen people talking about the possibility of that happening. I don't know that it actually has, but it's an interesting angle when you throw in the economic side of cybersecurity, or the
Yeah.
risks that are linked to economic cybersecurity. And then there's just so many threat actors, right? We tend to see a lot of stuff in the media, or from security vendors talking about the dangers of, nation state adversaries, and whether this country is going to attack you, or some related infrastructure. But the fact is, there's just so many ways to get hit by, things like commodity, or, almost accidental infections that can lead to things like ransomware. So yeah, on the red
Would
side,
you
it's really interesting.
would you say some of those motivations that the past was like, well, just because we can. It's like, why climb the mountain? Because we can.
Yeah,
Now there's a lot of motivating, like you were mentioning, there's a lot of motivating factors, sometimes financial, sometimes political, other things. And would you say those things determine the target or the level of the attack?
absolutely. Like the
Would you say?
majority of cybercrime is financially oriented, right? That is a fact. Like there are people in it for the money. There's some element of, people in it to screw around with others, for sure. But for the most part, the organized folks are looking for money, in the same way that any kind of organized criminal activity over the past, I don't know, thousands of years, I suppose, has ever been
Right.
linked, right? Anything's linked to money. There's obviously the political side of things, but what's interesting from a threat landscape perspective is, everyone is either going to be one of two things, right? You're either the target or you're the transport. Like someone is either trying to
Mm.
actively get at your infrastructure to make money out of you, or they're trying to use you as a like hopping point to get to someone else. So
Right.
that's interesting on the red side. On the blue side, or the defensive side, it's been a really interesting shift over like 20, maybe 30 years. If you think about how the technology has come together and how the different approaches to trying to keep pace with the changing threat landscape. Like if we go back to say like 2005, right, or maybe around that kind of area, we were focused on tools that were basically blocking files, right? Antivirus, looking for bad files, because the amount of bad stuff wasn't huge. But as that kind of threat landscape grew, and the AV file, the AV, file detection really wasn't scaling, we moved into behavioral stuff, and then kind of shifted away from individual tools to, I don't know if you remember, like the likes of McAfee and Symantec and Trend selling suites that had,
Yep.
15, 20 different products in that covered everything from AV to firewalls to data storage, right? So you had these big suites that were trying to manage all the tools at once. And then, you shift forward another 5 years to like the mid 2010s, and you're trying to, instead of manage tools, you're trying to manage the data that's being collected, because the industry realized there's a lot of interesting insights and decisions that can be made by looking at the data. So trying to take SIMs to, collect data and analyze it. Unfortunately, that didn't quite pan out either. So after 20 years, we moved into this newest phase, which, like I mentioned earlier, is really operationalizing things. Like, and what that means
Mm.
is, taking what you have and putting the people and the process in place to make things work, so that you can kind of democratize security, right? Advance
Mhm.
security for everything. But what's interesting, I guess, for me is like the things that haven't changed. So if I think back to 20 years ago when I was a practitioner, like vulnerability management sucked then, and it sucks now, right? It's hard to do, it's hard to prioritize. You've got a lot of devices, a lot of infrastructure to look after. But that was the same 20 years ago, and it baffles me that we haven't kind of solved that as an industry or been able to figure out how to solve it. And coming from the vendor side, I realize I'm probably partially to blame for some of that as well.
I've always wondered, to me, when I try to explain it to somebody that's that's not in the IT industry or in the cybersecurity industry, that there's somewhat of I would, for lack of a better analogy, an arms race.
Yep.
The red, the blue. You've got the attacker, the defender, and it's always seems like, well, there's an attack that comes in. Okay, let's put up a response to that attack. We have another attack, and you'd mentioned several of the things like what do you call it, compliance, knowing what your data landscape, your threat, your attack surface, how exposed is it, and so some of those are preemptive and some of those are responsive, right? Would you say that's developed over the years? Would you say that's kind of an accurate characterization of what's kind of going on right now?
Yeah, it's a kind of a philosophical discussion to be had there, really. Like, I think over the last 5 years, like we've seen all these great things around detection, about what we can do with the data, with the visibility, and being able to inspect what's actually happening and derive decisions, whether that's human-based or machine-driven decision making on what's good and what's bad, or what's normal and what's abnormal. But where it gets philosophical is that the right thing to do? Should we be spending as much time as we are on the detection side of things? Or if we kind of focused on that because that's where a lot of the marketing money is, and that's where a lot of the loudest voices are? Because ultimately, like, what's that phrase? Like, a pound of protection is worth something.
Ounce of protection, a pound of gear.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Thank you. Yep. And I think a lot of the protection or the prevention stuff is the hardest stuff to do, because that's the bit that impacts user experience more often than not as well, from an end user perspective. So while there's a lot of mileage to be had in detection and response and focusing on there, you have to learn the lessons of what you're detecting. What activity did you detect? How did you resolve that? And it's a circle, right? It's a loop. So what you learn in the detection and the response and the recover phase has to be implemented in the prevention. And I really struggle at the moment over the last few years with all of the fascination of things like EDR or XDR or whatever the next, 3-letter acronym buzzword's going to be, because it's always detection and response, and all of the thought leadership focuses there rather than the real prevention, right? The real part of recovering and responding to an incident.
So, we've talked a lot about the theory, the history, and things like that. No, so the title of this broadcast really is war stories. So let's get into that. To give me an example. What kind of war stories do you have from the field? From what have you dealt with? I mean, obviously, without giving getting into too much confidential stuff and what have you. Give me an example. Do you have any let's start with small business. Do you have any small business exposure type scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, so what's kind of interesting is that a lot of the incidents tend to be commodity, and what I mean by that is they're not necessarily targeted. They're opportunistic, right? There's a infection that's happens through one way or another, and it's not necessarily targeted. And that happens for both small business and for enterprise. But I think what's changed in those demographics specifically is that enterprise for the past 20 years has been focused on that risk, on that cybersecurity stuff, whereas small business has always been, there's always been that question of, well, they're never going to come after me because I've got nothing of interest. And I think that the change to extortion or ransomware and really monetizing the adversary side of things has changed that, right? And I said it earlier, is that everyone is either the target or the transport. And I think that most organizations now are aware of that risk to business from ransomware or data breaches. So we see evidence in the news every day, right? And there was one from Twitter just this week, a huge organization with, I'm sure, a huge spend on security, ended up with a breach, and it impacts S&P and enterprise. The large enterprises traditionally had able to spend more usually on cybersecurity than an SMB, which really sucks, right? Because all of the businesses have the same aspirations, right? They want to transact, they want to do business, they want to grow, yada yada yada. They want to make use of the internet and all of its fantasticness, but they've got that, they've got to do that in the face of the ever-changing, I guess, threat landscape, right, to use an awful phrase. And a lot of organizations now realize that they've seen the the evidence that this could, something could turn their business off overnight. Like, here's an example here. It's like, it's not just small underfunded enterprises. There was a large enterprise that had an incident last year that involved a pretty well documented vulnerability in Microsoft Exchange. So Exchange is an email and collaboration platform. Yep. A lot of folks have moved to Office 365, but there's plenty of instances of organizations that keep Exchange servers on premises for one reason or another. Now, for whatever reason, this organization hadn't applied the patches to all of their Exchange servers. And honestly, it's just pretty trivial to find vulnerable servers these days, right? You can use things like Shodan online to go and search for devices running almost anything. So what we saw was this threat actor being able to go from exploiting a vulnerability in Exchange to installing Cobalt Strikes beacon inside the environment, and then deploying the Lockbit ransomware. And this happened in less than 90 minutes, right? It happened out of hours, and this organization, although they had a 24/7 operation, they still didn't catch it within that 90 minutes. So an hour and a half or whatever from start to finish is pretty impressive, also pretty worrying, like that you can take the organization down. But I mean, now, right, that's the kind of the headline. There are some other security issues there, right, that if not present could have slowed it down. Like, I think the organization had been a little bit overzealous on the account permissions. They've left some things logged in that they shouldn't have. So the attacker got very lucky, but it's an example of a relatively mature security team kind of being punished for not being fast enough, right, which we all know is an impossible task anyway.
Yep. Yeah, and the speed of response is kind of the key. When we talk really about that war, for lack of a better term, and the speed of the response is really
that cat and mouse thing is honestly it's two things, right? It's either the speed of the response or the amount of time that you've been fortunate enough to put into preparation. Like, the other side of things that I see a lot more, I guess, a lot more of a light being shone on these days is what happens when an incident happens and how prepared are you. And I kind of throw this back to when I was a sysadmin. Like, every week we would basically random number generate a server name from our fleet, and we would have to take that server down and restore it from backup to make sure that our backups were working. Because if something went down, we didn't want to have to do a live test of all our data validity on the fly when your hair's on fire. And so I kind of link that to incident response as well. It's like, how many organizations actually know, like, what's the first thing that happens when someone reports a ransomware or someone detects ransomware? Who makes a decision to turn off a network switch? Like, how do you sit through and game plan that so that you know who's going to make those decisions, and it's not everyone kind of looking around the room or looking around the Zoom.
Almost like a security fire drill. Yeah, almost like a security fire drill.
Well, I put it down. It's like by law, right? Isn't it? For most buildings of a certain size, you have to do a fire drill and a fire test at least once or twice a year, and everyone gets up and gets out and knows where to go and what to do. That needs to happen with incident response too.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to take a quick break here and just remind everybody that's watching us live, please feel free to chat us your questions if you have any for Ian or myself, and we can definitely get to them as they come up. So now we've talked about, again, more of the history in the present day and some of the war stories, some of the stuff that does show up out there. Let's talk kind of moving towards the future. So presently, most companies right now are in a land grab, and they're looking to get a CISO. They're looking to get an officer for just dedicating themselves to the security practice and secure all the policies, running the security fire drills, all those things we just discussed. So how do you see the role of a CISO?
Yeah, it seems like a thankless job, honestly. Right? You're brought in to try and take the flak and try and reposition things, and ultimately, there's a reason why CISOs tend to have such a short tenure. I think it's a very stressful role. It's a highly responsible and highly accountable position to be in. But ultimately, I would rather have a CISO, or I'd rather be a CISO in a position to be able to make recommendations and changes that are right for the business than have people that aren't necessarily connected to the security realm trying to make decisions for your business too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sad part about, much like IT, the sad part is if they do their job, nobody notices, right? If they do their job,
that's the thing that sucks, right? It's that you're the unsung hero, because if no one hears about you, you're doing a great job.
Exactly. So let's talk some of more of the future, the trends right now that are moving towards the future. What for both the offense and the defense, what trends are you seeing there? What types of, let's say, maybe technologies are on the attack front, or what is being used on the on the back end, both for prevention and detection? What do you see now and or moving towards the future? What kinds of trends?
Yeah, it's like ransomware is just from the offensive side. Like ransomware and extortion is just so successful that that's going to continue to be the number one issue. For And I don't even know what the solution could be. I couldn't even predict or guess what a perfect solution to ransomware would be, because it's just one of those things that's so intrinsically linked to the operation of a machine or an operating system that it's hard to discern what is malicious and block it completely.
Yep.
So I definitely see the ransomware and extortion is going to continue to be top of mind for everyone. On the defensive sides, like there's a lot more talk about, which I'm glad to hear about, is more about identity and more about credential protection. Like ultimately, like one of the top goals for any adversary is to try and get credentials and try and get domain admin basically, or root access to devices. So being able to control more of how your users make use of privileged access, how they control and use credentials. We've been talking about multi-factor authentication for it feels like decades now. Right? Probably been 10 years, maybe less. It's very pervasive, but there's still organizations that don't do it. And that kind of, I'm not trying to shame or blame organizations. I actually think it's the software vendor's fault for not going all in and saying, hey, if you want to do X, Y, and Z, your users have to use multi-factor authentication. And let me give you an example. Like there's this video game my kids play. I've got two kids, 12 and 9, and both of them love playing Fortnite. And we play Fortnite together. And in the game, you get these skins. You can buy stuff with either real money or earn things, and you can gift them around. But to be able to really do anything to interact with any of the store, you have to have an account that's secured by multi-factor authentication, because Epic Games know that there's a lot of money to be made in hacking someone's account and selling it onto someone else. So my 12-year-old and my 9-year-old know what multi-factor authentication is. They understand how password security works. They know not to share their password. They know to question whether or not they should be entering it. And a lot of times they know their security practice is better than some of the large enterprises I've spoke to over the past years. And the reason they do that is because Epic Games forced it on them. It's like, if you want to do this, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to have this turned on. But can you imagine the uproar if Microsoft said, if you want to send an email outside of your organization, your user has to have multi-factor authentication enabled. Like there's going to be a lot of middle-aged white accountants screaming at Microsoft trying to get them to change their mind at that point. And I think that's baffling, right? I think this world of opt-in security is wrong. It should be opt-out, like security by default.
And that's a point I wanted to bring up. Now, like you brought up some of this like older software, but then you also brought up, say like, your kids and middle-aged white accountant. Do you think the idea of getting into really thinking about security, is it a technology problem or is it a culture of security? Like the idea of instilling a culture and designing whether it be a corporate culture or culture as a whole about security around those ideas.
That's really a hot button topic for me. Like it really does get me going, because I think as an industry, cybersecurity has done a terrible job of being like communicating the benefits of security. Like you only have to wait till October and it's going to be Security Awareness Month, and you're going to see like cybersecurity professionals bashing all of the good work that things like CISA are trying to do by educating the general public, because let's face it, a lot of folks in cybersecurity know best, right? Everyone knows their domain best and likes to scoff at others that don't know it. And so I think we've kind of fostered this culture of exclusivity where people don't make it as welcoming a community. And I definitely see that for things like security awareness. And then on the flip side of that, like if you think of organizations, think of your business, like the only time you hear from security or IT security is when you've done something wrong. You clicked on something that was a phishing test. You failed your phishing test. Oh, holy crap, that's something else that really annoys me, is that organizations that do phishing tests, and the IT team will spend days or weeks trying to craft the perfect thing and celebrating when they manage to trick their colleagues into clicking a link. Like, congratulations, no one's learned anything other than the IT team is there to beat them with a stick. So it's no surprise that we find that end users, your colleagues, your staff, don't want to call security and say, hey, look, I think I've been tricked into giving my password away. Like, in an ideal world, we would be in this place where someone would do something and realize it's suspicious and immediately contact the help desk, immediately know that they should change their password and let everyone know. But people are worried about getting fired. They see security as a stick they're going to get beaten with, not as a tool to help them be better.
Yep, absolutely. So One of the other things that I wanted to ask you is what right now, what do you see as the biggest threat to, we deal a lot with, and I'm going to say to small to medium enterprise companies, because we deal a lot with small to medium enterprise.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest, like, if you could narrow it down to one, what would you see as the single biggest threat?
I mean, I mentioned it a bunch of times, right? Ransomware, of course, is the biggest threat.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is how the ransomware gets there. That's the real problem, right? Just because there's so many ways for an adversary to get access, it doesn't have to be the adversary being smart. It doesn't have to be, stupid end users doing something wrong, like clicking on links, right? There's just so many ways. It can be through phishing. It can be through supply chains. Like your organization could be compromised by one of your business partners. There are a lot of organizations that use MSSPs and give them, carte blanche access to their entire infrastructure so that they can make changes and update things when they need to. So, it could be through vulnerabilities you don't even know exist, right? That's what's the issue is with zero-day vulnerabilities. In the grand scheme of things, that's not the biggest risk. So, I mean, I wish I had a cool suggestion, but really it's all about getting back to basics and figuring out how you can do, basics is the wrong word, actually, I'm going to correct myself, figuring out the foundational security practices.
Yeah.
The reason I don't like basics is because it makes it sound like it's easy. It's not.
Yeah. We do have a question. Question from Gary. How should businesses think about and approach IoT devices and security? IoT devices are, again, newer, like a lot of people are implementing them. So, yeah. How should businesses think about and approach, maybe from a best practices?
Yeah, it's such a I was going to say new area, but that's not true. But it's still a growing area for cybersecurity. And one of the reasons it's tough to manage those IoT devices is a lot of them are closed box. You can't really deploy anything on them in the same way you would a cloud instance or an endpoint or a server. So really, from my perspective, is really trying to understand what is it that it tries to do and try and segment it as much as you can on the network away from anything else. And that's another, good best practice is not have a flat network anyway, but implement a specific VLAN network, subnet, or something that keeps it isolated from your normal traffic as much as possible. And really, again, make it be an opt-in security so that IoT device can only do the things that it's supposed to do. It can only communicate over the ports it's designed to and lock it down as much as possible. And it's about reducing the risk, right? That's what it comes down to.
Right. Maybe implementing the network access control on that particular, that particular set of devices and so forth. No, that makes absolute sense. So thanks for the question, and thanks for your response. So to continue on, we've only got a few minutes left. So where do we go from here? Future, what is the future going to look like? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what are some future ideas? AI is something that I've thought about. AI security modeling and attack detection and those kinds of. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so machine learning and AI and stuff is interesting, right? Because it helps us derive, again, points of view or decisions from data sets. But I don't think it's the magic bullet, if that's the right word, that it's been touted for 10 years. I mean, we've seen endpoint vendors come and go that bet their entire business on things like AI and machine learning, and it never really panned out. And unfortunately, as much as I'd like to say I don't have a crystal ball, I can tell you what's going to make the most difference. And I said it earlier, it's foundational security. Like the basics the foundations of security is going to solve 80% of the risk. But the foundations are hard and boring, right? Everyone wants to work on cool things. Everyone wants to be on the red team or the purple team. They want to work on cutting edge of new technology. But you need to get those basics, the preventions in place, like having vulnerability management, having things like asset management, asset catalogs, like understanding what devices you have that you need to protect, understanding what those devices are running. All of these things are really hard to implement at scale for even the largest organization with the biggest budget, let alone small organizations. And that's why I say, foundational security is foundational for a reason, but it's so hard to implement.
Locking the front door.
Yeah,
physical
security. You can lock the front door, but if you leave a window open as well, that's the other side.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah. So I have a question. So I just got to ask this since we're talking security. It's one of my side questions, but I have to ask it. What's your favorite cybersecurity hacker movie? Whatever, something related to security in a movie.
Easy. Sneakers is the best hacker movie ever.
Mine too.
Anyone else that says different is wrong.
Yep. Robert Redford, Dan Aykroyd, love it. Sneakers.
Exactly.
It covers all of them, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. That's the only correct answer.
Yeah. I love it. I, I was hoping you were going to say it. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, we've come to the end of our half hour here.
Oh wow, that was
God, I wish
fast.
we could. It went really fast. I wish we could talk more, but this has been great. For all of you that are attending, I really do appreciate everybody showing up. If you'd like to know more, please visit it on all of our social media sites. Check us out at www.netcenter.net. Feel free to email us at info@netcenter.net at any of our social media channels. We do this NCI Live every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central Time. So please feel free to join us. Ian, again, it's been a great pleasure to have you on, and we really
Thanks so
appreciate
much. I really enjoyed it.
it.
Appreciate it. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
And for everyone else, thanks for joining us on NCI Live.